Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Healing the Spirit. I am really excited to share this episode today because you are in for a treat. I have my dear friend Megan Frye, and Megan is also a fellow astrologer. Megan also explores and is such a talented practitioner of hypnotherapy. And in this conversation, we really explored the axis of Sagittarius and Gemini. And I was really saving the best for last. As you may know, if you're listening to this episode right when it's released, that today is the last day of Sagittarius season. And honestly, the reason why I waited for this long was because I wasn't quite sure if this was more a Sagittarius conversation or if this was more Gemini conversation. And honestly, where I've landed is that it's both. This conversation is really an exploration of both ends of the spectrum of reality, of Sagittarius and Gemini kinds of reality. Which again, this idea of reality as being a construction of our, belief systems as well as our individual or collective perspective is very much a theme for the Sagittarius and Gemini axis. And this is something that Megan and I explored quite a bit in this conversation. It really is a Jupiterian Scheherazade, I think. We explored some pretty edgy topics, but I can sense, looking back, that none of us were really interested in having answers, but rather we were more interested in kind of exploring and seeing what comes up in the exploration. And if that's the kind of conversation that you enjoy, conversations where two friends literally just explore, topics that light them up, then I think you will really love this conversation. And I also think that there's some really good astrological wisdom and learnings that you may also discover through this episode. But, we really didn't try to do it in a pedantic way at all. Like, it was really more of like a personal essay between me and Megan of what it means to live in the Sagittarius-Gemini axis, which, are pretty important energies in both of our birth charts. We spoke about the rulers of Sagittarius and Gemini, Jupiter and Mercury. We spoke about the maybe manifestation through various deities, Odin, Santa Claus, or Saint Nick. We spoke about this idea of living in the expansion and the contraction of reality and life. It's very much a freestyle, this conversation. There's lots of exciting, I think, storytelling. And it's incredible. I also really love how towards the end, Megan spoke so beautifully about her work doing hypnotherapy for clients. And so stay tuned for that part. I would say, as I usually encourage in my contemplations, like with this conversation specifically, my invitation for you is to kind of feel into what is coming up in your field as you listen to this conversation and allow that to be interesting explorations and interesting information for you rather than, anchoring into some sort of truth, because that's also certainly how Megan and I had so much fun, because we weren't really trying to kind of arrive at a particular conclusion. And as Megan mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, keep an open mind and see what comes up. All right, I am going to introduce you to Megan by way of her bio. Megan Frye is an independent writer and translator, an eternal student of photography, astrology, music, and yoga. She came into hypnotherapy during the year of her Gemini nodal return. You could say hypnotherapy is her B-side, but as any audiophile knows, the B-side is often the best side. Megan spends most of her time outdoors, on the road, and in loving theta with the world and beings around her. She is honored to guide clients through therapeutic hypnosis, which she believes to be one of the most rapidly transformational healing modalities available. Her greatest teachers are nature, the subconscious mind, and those who fearlessly and compassionately embrace their shadow. Megan is a Cancer rising, Aries sun, and Aquarius moon. She has a Sagittarius stellium and loves her Taurus placements most of all. She grew up in Michigan and, like a hermit crab, has called many places home and is always looking for the next best place. Blame it on the Sag. She is the proud co-founder of Holistic Soul Project, an international, nature-focused, in-person collaborative and transformational mystic retreat experience. All right, without further ado, this is my conversation with Megan Frye. Welcome to the podcast, Megan. Thank you for being here with me.
Thank you, Jonathan. It is so exciting to be here with you on these very wild days and these very wild times. There are very few people that I would like to be speaking with as much as you. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I received that. I have to say that this conversation has been quite some time in the making, and I've been so excited to talk to you because I've just known you to be someone who's so deeply connected to your own wisdom. And, as magical people, we don't always feel our own magic all the time, especially transits like these. You kind of just feel, I kind of just feel crazy, But I feel that every single time I have an interaction with you, there is always so much embodied wisdom that you bring into the space. And you're also one of the practitioners who's I just admire your space holding skills so much. I remember our very first session was actually a past life regression that lasted for 4.5 hours?
Yeah. It was a marathon. Yeah.
It was a marathon and it was wild. And I was like, how does this person do it? So anyways, I am just so excited to have you and to explore everything that's been on our minds and that we've allowed to infuse our conversation spaces in the past couple months.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you to everybody that's listening for having an open mind and being here with us. And thank you for the comments on my space holding. It's something that definitely I didn't really realize the capacities that I had until I started to work within a magical framework and to really work with the subconscious mind and to work with people who were on a similar wavelength and could reflect to me more what I was doing, which just hasn't really always been my experience in life. And like you said, I think there's a lot of us who were just, there's a certain level of unawareness, our own unknown to ourselves can sometimes become our greatest power that other people can live in and experience and benefit from. So
absolutely. Thank you for that. I like to begin all of my conversations with a question that is really grounded in the present moment, which is, who do you feel, sense, or know yourself to be in this present moment or this chapter in your life?
So today and many other days, but today I'm a storyteller. I'm a
Mm.
poet. I'm a sorceress. I'm a guide. I'm an underworld tenant. I'm neurodivergent, and I'm a caregiver. And frequently, I am many other things, statuses, and experiences. But that's what I've got today.
Wow. I got chills hearing that. I feel, how do you feel about exploring one of those? I heard you say tenant of the underworld.
Mhm.
Can we speak a little bit about that?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes I feel like my rent is free, but other times I do feel like I'm paying. And
Mm.
right now is kind of one of those times where, um, yeah, I mean, I've got Pluto square Pluto. I'm going to have Pluto on my moon very soon. And I just feel like I am, kind of doing a bit of time in the
Mm.
underworld right now. I'm not
Mm.
fully there, permanently. I'm just renting, leasing a space. And, sometimes when I go on shorter dips into the underworld, there is no charge.
Yeah.
But right now, I do feel like there's a little bit of an exchange going on.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. I feel that, it's interesting because it's taken me a while to understand even what the underworld looks like to me,
Mm.
which, in some ways maybe speaks to my, the ways in which I've been lucky in life, but also,
Mm.
I don't know, I think maybe it's my personality too. As you know, I have been exploring, the Akashic field for a while, and it almost feels like, oh, this is where I've been living, and there's almost
Mm.
like this cosmic perspective that I think I've just always been connected to, even in the dark moments of my life. And something that I've learned from working with you in sessions, one-on-one sessions, is really the value of going into the underworld and communicating with that part of us. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that, and for bringing that work into the world. I feel like that's so important because so many of us are either not equipped to look at our underworld material, or we're just not interested, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think it can be scary,
Mm-hmm.
but it is also the place where I have found that the most consciousness can be gathered from, in terms of our consciousness spreading out into the world, can be gathered from this place of unconsciousness, which is, I'm more metaphorically speaking,
Yeah.
about when I talk about the underworld. And the space of the unconscious, of the subconscious, is this capacity. We have the capacity to really change our life from that space.
Mm.
Um, but it is also this part of ourselves that sometimes is really, it's challenging to see. It's scary. Um, but once we incorporate it, and once we are able to feel like we can be seen from our space of the underworld, which, thank you for allowing me to be seen from my space of the underworld today.
Mm.
It's so empowering because it's kind of always been a fear of mine before I really started to work with trance and the subconscious and hypnotherapy,
Yeah.
that, who will love me when I'm in the underworld?
Mm.
And
Oof.
am I worthy of love when I'm in the underworld?
Yeah.
And am I worthy of being seen? And I feel like the answer is yes. I mean, I have to be, because it's part of my existence. Pluto in the fourth house, like it's present all the time. And so it's it's been so empowering for me to be able to incorporate parts of myself, of my underworld, and to be able to, express them, and also help other people come to that space, to being able to be willing to experience and even love what they find in the underworld.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a gift, and that is empowerment.
Wow. So much wisdom there. What comes up for me is also remembering that the underworld is part of the cosmos as well, and
Mm-hmm.
it's what makes up it's, if the Akashic field is the all and the everything, right? Then the underworld is an integral part of that Akashic field and it's not actually separate. So even just
Yeah.
hearing us talk about this is giving me so much richness about the underworld. Yeah.
Mm.
Hmm.
I love the Akashic records. I love that you're working more in the Akashic records now. I'm really excited about this for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Thank
it
you.
is everything. It's very Piscean.
It
It's
is.
very 12th house, right? Because it's
Totally.
everything and nothing, right? I mean, it's all possibilities and everything that's ever existed and everything that could exist.
Totally. Totally. So I want to pivot us into a topic that we have been wanting to explore
Mm-hmm.
when we decided to have this conversation, which is really around the Gemini Sagittarius axis. And as I'm feeling into this topic, my mind is just going, wow, what a preface to the Gemini Sagittarius axis. It's like traveling to the cosmos and the underworld and all of the crevices of the universe.
Mm.
I'm really curious to hear, first and foremost, when we brought up this idea, right? When this idea of Gemini and Sagittarius came up, what were your thoughts? What were your experiences? What came up for you?
So I feel that I'm just kind of bouncing back and forth on the axis of Gemini and Sagittarius my whole
Mm.
life, my whole existence.
Mm.
Um, and I mean, I have definitely plenty of astrological placements that signify that. But what I feel like between Gemini and Sagittarius is just it's local and it's universal, and then it's small and it's massive, and it's just this constant expansion and contraction that I feel with that living within that axis, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of just having the knowledge and the wisdom and going with the flow to be able to navigate, for me, where my wisdom is going to be most received, where I'm personally going to learn the most is it's always on that axis. It's my nodal axis. It's
Mm.
my south node is Sagittarius in the sixth house, north node Gemini in the 12th. And it's just a constant coming back and forth. And I feel that anyone that is living on this axis is privileged in the sense that, I mean, there's always an invitation to live the non-binary with
Mm-hmm.
Gemini, and there's always an invitation to just go so massively big into and deep and profound into teachings and learnings and philosophy with Sag. And it's really a gift, but it's heavy on the mind. It can be really heavy on the mind, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have it on your 6 and 12 house axis, is that right, Maya?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. It's interesting because I also have my nodal axis on the 6th and 12th. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing it's in a different sign, but I'm hearing some of these resonances with what you're sharing. Um, to me, it's so exciting to be thinking about that polarity that you were bringing into the conversation here about, local and universal and small and massive, and kind of like thinking about my own lived experience. I have Gemini in the 10th house of career and public reputation, and I have
Mm-hmm.
Sagittarius in my home life.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've noticed is that there's almost sometimes a fear for me in allowing my Sagittarius self to be seen out in the public world, because Sagittarius to me also has that embodiment of conviction. Like there's deep, powerful almost forceful conviction with Sagittarius energy that can feel really activating, And it's also, the funny thing is, thinking about Sagittarius as a mutable fire sign, right? It's also something that shifts over time. It's not conviction for the end of times, right? It's conviction at this moment, but I'm
Yes.
so convinced by this at this moment that I can't help myself but to be so fired up about it. And sometimes allowing that to be seen is challenging. I'm curious to hear about what that experience was like for you in whatever ways you feel like sharing. How has Sagittarius shown up for you in your lived experience or in your professional work?
So, in addition to working in the esoteric field and with hypnotherapy and astrology, I have been a writer. I've been trained as a writer for many years. I've been working as an independent journalist. I have a history of newsroom reporting, copy editing, all kinds of things related to that. And I think that Sagittarius there's such a ravenous hunger on that axis. And Sagittarius is just like, I want it all really big, but, of course, like whatever my conviction and whatever my obsession is in the moment, where Gemini is like, okay, just let me have at it. And I will just like, like picturing just like going to town on like an ear of corn, and like, and whatever little kernels go flying about, it's like, well, that I don't have space for that at this moment, but I'm going to try to absorb it all. And so, sometimes it's difficult for me to differentiate between the Sagittarius and the Gemini, because it's just a flow that I just feel like being in all the time. I would say the Sagittarian in me is usually on the road. I travel as much as I humanly possibly can. And it is something that I've always felt the need to do. I've always felt wildly attracted to and passionate about. And I've always found that I've gained so much from the experience that I have, whether that is, and again, this is where it's difficult to differentiate between the Gemini and Sag. I mean, whether I'm on a road trip in the United States or, now I live in Mexico, that seems very Sagittarian. Whereas like road tripping around the US is very Gemini. I host mystical retreats around the world, and that's so Sagittarian in scope, but also like the act of being with people on these retreats and sharing with them and being in a community is so Gemini, because they're small. We only have 11 people or so on our retreats. So
yeah.
I really do feel like I'm just kind of in the breeze always of the Gemini and Sagittarius axis.
Absolutely. Wow. It makes me think about one of our conversations earlier around, like off the record, talking about these retreats that you've been hosting. And, to pull off planning a retreat, I imagine, is no small feat. I'm a Virgo rising, and it really freaks me out thinking about having to plan such a big thing for people, and it's and also bringing in the fact that these retreats are really spaces you brought for people to get to know themselves on a deeper level, which is such a big undertaking in some ways. Like, it's deeply ambitious. And I remember just being in such awe, seeing you being able to really pull this off during the pandemic. And that is just something that, I don't know, I'm curious to hear more about your experience about that. Like, how was that experience? And it is also something I should note is that this is a period where a lot of people are really missing that communal connection that they usually have, right? This is the time when a lot of people are staying at home or like being really afraid of catching COVID. And there's something that I find so powerful about that conviction, you know, of like, okay, we're going to make sure that we have safety measures, and we're going to do this thing that is going to be really nourishing for our souls.
Mm-hmm. There's so much in what you just said, and I love it so much. I'm excited to talk about it. And what you were first, I mean, like the scope of it is very Jupiterian, which I also have in Sagittarius. And the idea for these came during my nodal return, which was during the height of the pandemic, if we can call it that, like the 2020 into 2021. But, you know, I want to give a nod to my Aries sun and Mercury here, because I didn't really know what I was getting into, and I just did it. And you're right, it is intense. It's so much. And if I had any Virgo placements, absolutely, I would have been more trepidatious about it. And now I'm like backtracking, and now that they've happened, now that we've hosted 5, myself and my collaborators who are amazing people, now that we've hosted 5, I'm just like, okay, now I have to get Virgo about this, because like I've seen where it can go. I've seen the healing, and I've seen the possibility. And now I need to make them like really, really, I guess, tangible for in a lot of different ways, you know, like the scheduling and how many are we going to do, and where are we going to do them, and how many people are going to come, and why are we doing these, you know, and really discerning the places that we have these, and that kind of thing. And discerning how to label them, instead of being just, you know, oh, we're just going to call it yoga retreats because that's like what everybody's looking for. It's not a yoga retreat. It like yoga is there, just like dance is there, and group hypnosis, and a lot of themes. But you know, that's part of the discernment, is like, okay, now what are we going to call these things? And so what I have seen from this experience of holding space for people in a physical community that comes together in the pandemic, is to see people coming and not being really able or sure how or where to make eye contact, where to place their eyes when they're talking to someone, because it's been so long since they've actually had a physical in-person conversation or exchange with someone that they don't know, you know, with a stranger. And this is big Gemini Sagittarius vibes too, is strangers. And that's one of the things that I missed during the pandemic. I'm like, I just want to talk to strangers. Like, I want to have a random conversation with somebody. I want to just like randomly come across, you know, something that we might have in common, even if that's as small as we're buying the same, you know, coffee that day or something like that. I mean, I'm from the Midwest, so like talking in grocery stores is really common. Chatting up strangers in grocery stores. But I mean, just being able to see that experience that people have of coming together after not being able to for so long, and experiencing what it might be like to join a community that isn't the one that they're either born in or living in. You know, like this is a community that they're traveling, and we're taking this chance that we are magnetizing, they are coming for it. Like it's all aligned. There's an alignment. And I do want to say that one of the things that made me want to do this was I did travel. I did a retreat myself and a training in Colombia in February 2021, height of the pandemic, and, you know, PCR testing and all kinds of things. And I was happy to do so. And I went and I spent 3 weeks in the jungle next to the Caribbean with people that I have never met. And it was a miracle to be able to just be physically present with people who were on the same wavelength,
Yeah.
even if just for those 3 weeks,
Right.
even if our interests really only aligned because, we had this call that we needed to travel. And I know that there are people that would have a problem with me talking about this, and that's fine, and I accept that. But I mean, out of all of my placements during the pandemic and during my nodal return, my Gemini and Sagittarius was the one that was screaming
Yeah.
because it was just, it needed something. It needed to move. It needed to fly about and be unhindered in some way, while being safe, and while taking precautions. And so how healing that was for me, and that's actually where I met my business partner, Larissa, in Colombia. I said, and how healing it was for the other people that were there. I said, this is what I want. And this is the kind of space I want to hold, because we've all been magnetized here from all corners of the globe to be here together. And I don't think that is a coincidence.
Yeah. Wow. I love everything you're saying, Megan, and I feel like so much is coming up. The first one that I want to point out, and I feel like all of this is so related to thinking about this Gemini Sagittarius axis, right? The first one was this conundrum, of like naming your offering, right? I often think of marketing and naming and really like bestowing a name upon something that is unnameable, right? When we create magical offerings, when we create these experiences for people to meet themselves, they're actually unnameable. Like, what are you going to call them? A reading? Like there's just something about the name that maybe falls short of like the magnitude of what this can represent. And to me, that is the conflict, or maybe not the conflict, but really the polarity between Gemini and Sagittarius, right? With Gemini, we really have to kind of narrow down into one word that can be understood by people, that can be found by people. If you start naming retreats as something that is, I don't know, that nobody even knows what this is, then nobody's going to find it. And then when nobody finds it, how can you create magic, right? So there's that push and pull, between wanting to express the inexpressible, right, that Sagittarius is in search of, with representing it with like a small little flower of a name, that's so sweet and humble and can encapsulate, hopefully, the entirety of that grandiose vision. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And then another thing that was coming up too, that I feel like is extremely Gemini Sag, is this idea of widespread social disconnection. It's interesting because as you were speaking, I am remembering that the pandemic, or at least parts of it, right, was really happening during the Gemini Sag nodal axis, like in terms of the actual macro astro transit, right? Or weather.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it was what a time for exploring what information is.
Exactly.
And things were changing all the time.
By the minute.
By the minute. And
by the minute.
Is it okay to travel? Can we travel? Are we allowed to? What kind of test is needed?
Yeah.
When will I be able to do this again? That kind of thing. And it was a tricky time.
Yeah.
It was a really, really tricky time for so many reasons. And I certainly don't want to discount that there is a public health threat that, has affected all of us in so many different ways. So, but at the same time, like, we all have very different experiences for how we were living when we started to experience a lockdown, for example.
Yeah.
Some people had unemployment, and some people had a garden that they could, practice,
Mhm.
homesteading, things like that. And some of us were living in a concrete box
Yeah. And then
and
connecting with people from across the world through Zoom,
through Zoom for the
like you and
first
I.
time. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that the Aquarian part of me was really excited about that. Like,
Mm.
like my Aquarian moon, and just was so like, oh my gosh, you mean that I can connect with people just through the touch of a button who are from around the world, who I have so much in common with that I don't know if I would have found them. I probably wouldn't have found them if it wouldn't have been for the internet. And if it
Totally.
wouldn't have been for the fact that we're all stuck at home.
Yeah.
So in a way, like there's, the retreats themselves is just like this. Um, I started doing hypnosis online through Zoom and through the telephone.
Hmm.
That's like that's a smaller thing, and then the Sagittarian aspect of that is the retreats, and
Yeah.
bringing a localized experience into something that is really expansive, but also very extremely local and very intimate.
Hmm.
Once you're there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And also thinking about this Gemini Sag nodal placement, right? That I think really ended in the beginning of 2022,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm remembering that correctly. I
Mm-hmm.
think that one of the lessons that probably a lot of us learn as a collective too is how futile dogma can be. There's a way in which even just our responses to the pandemic, like none of them has been working. you
Right.
know and
Right.
so there's a breakdown in terms of the solid idea of who we are and what we need to do in order to respond to certain crises. And yeah, I'm aware that even me saying that may be really triggering to some people, but the truth is, I think a lot of us are seeing now that there's just no one right way. There's just no one right path to um, getting out of this, or is there even a getting out of this, right? Is this now just something that we have to live with? And if so, in the paraphrase word of the very wise Sophie Strand, if contamination is already happening and if we're always contaminated, then what does that mean about life? How can we imagine an existence outside of the purity or the puritanical culture that we've been sold as the way to be a good person, Yeah.
Gosh, that is amazing. And that is so profound because none of us have the answers. And I'm not even convinced that the people who claim to have the answers have the answers. And that
Mm-hmm.
is not to like discredit um, the studies that people have done and the
Yeah.
experience that they have, um, and the difficulty that we've all experienced through this. But I do believe that it's something that we do have to learn how to live with and how to minimize harm, while honoring our social makeup as humans.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, it
Absolutely.
is so. I mean, the amount of people, the number of people who I connect with as clients and beyond, who have are just having a really hard time with being seen and being witnessed and coming and expanding out into the world now that apparently we are allowed to again,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and the demands, the society's demands, and work demands and all these things. I, for one, am completely overwhelmed because, a job that I had before the pandemic was a travel writer.
Mm-hmm.
And from one day to the next, I had loads of stories that I had been working on that I couldn't sell.
Hmm.
And because I wasn't supposed to be writing about travel at that time. So,
Wow.
what happens in a situation like that? Then who am I? And what path do I take? And how do I mutable my way around this very particular situation. And how can I, make what I do, how can I use what I've been doing and turn it into something sustainable?
Mm. Mm.
But yeah, 100%. I mean, the contamination of whatever it is not going away anytime soon. But I do think that we're at risk of losing contact with our own humanity,
Yeah.
and with the humanity of our neighbors, and the humanity of people that maybe we used to kind of buddy up with, maybe at the bar or something, but didn't have everything in common with.
Mm-hmm.
But now we don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is like back, to the dogma conversations. Just like I don't even know how really to exist in that space. I have to go full non-binary at this point, full
Totally.
Gemini, and just like, what do you believe? Cool, like, good for you. I respect it. Like, that isn't necessarily what I believe,
Yeah.
but I mean, as long as it's not doing harm. But what is harm? I mean,
Yeah. Right. Right. And I feel
what
like
isn't harm?
what isn't harm, right? It's really interesting because something that is coming up for me is also around, with regards to Sagittarius, right? A word that I've been really exploring for the past year in my work with one of my teachers, Leah Garza, is
Mm,
ontologies. And this
mm,
idea that, ontologies, the study of ontology really is about investigating what we consider to be our reality, right? How do we design our reality? What do we consider real and what do we not consider real? Because there may be some people, I mean, they wouldn't be listening to this conversation, I'm sure, but there would be some people who would say, astrology is total bullshit, right? Like, what is even Gemini and Sagittarius but something that we make up, But the reality is, so much of our reality is made up, right? Our government is made up.
yeah,
The central bank is made up.
yeah.
Our stock
Our
markets,
our borders.
our borders, they're all made up. So,
Yeah.
really kind of holding the both end of that, right? And maybe the study then, when I tune into Gemini and Sagittarius on like a heart or soul level, what I'm really feeling from this axis of archetypes is really, it really has something to do with honoring our existence, right? Honoring the smallness of our existence as a human that, has a definite life cycle, right? And then the infinity or the infiniteness of our soul. And how do we work with the fact that we are spirits that are currently living the experience of a limited body?
Mm.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mm. And how limited is our body?
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, we have edges, we have skin, but then we get into energetics,
Right.
and how far is my attitude when I come out into the street? How far is that affecting other people?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
how far, I mean, especially with, the energy work and Akashic, it's like, okay, where does the body really end?
Hmm.
I don't know. I
I
don't
don't
know.
know.
I mean, it's definitely an organic experience, but no, I think that's a beautiful reflection. And I do think that, yeah, I mean, Sagittarius, the Sag and Gemini axis is that it's so it's by its nature, it's trickstery, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so movable and adaptable. And to consider that both are so representative of spirit, but
Mm.
in different ways, and of movement and of our relationship with, like, moving through spirit and how spirit moves through us.
Wow. Yeah, that reminds me, Megan, of the fact that in one of my energy classes, one of my students mentioned that in I believe the Greek root of the word, right? It's spiritus, and it has something to do with breath, right? But that breath also is connected to fire. So it's interesting because before, she's actually a Greek scholar, and somehow before she even spoke about that, when I surveyed the room, there was kind of the sense that when the word spirit comes up, the elements that were connected to that word was air and fire. Like just naturally we associate spirit with air and fire. And so I think there's something really powerful there, to contemplate on, about this connection between Gemini Sagittarius axis and spirit. Thank you for bringing that.
Yeah. Let's dig into it.
Yeah.
What do you think when you think of Sagittarius in terms of spirit?
The first image that came up for me is this traveling fire, right? Like what does it mean for fire to travel, you know? And a lot of it, I don't think there's necessarily answers to this, but more stories, right? One thing you had mentioned earlier about who you feel yourself to be in the present moment is a storyteller. And I feel that. I feel that with the Sagittarius archetype with regards to spirit, there's something about like this fire that wants to travel, that wants to animate one place and then, illuminate another place, right? And what does it mean for our survival, especially before we had electricity as humans, to be traveling with fire? What does that traveling fire contribute to our survival as a species? That's what I'm pondering about. What about for you?
Well, I love the idea of traveling fire, and is so powerful. And that's one of the ways that I envision my loaded Sagittarius sixth house as a comet being propelled by Jupiter-Uranus conjunction into the 12th house, into the unknown of Gemini.
Yeah.
And then coming back, like again, like it's back and forth. And that traveling fire, it carries secrets and wisdom, and it carries so much knowledge, and then it's spoken out through Gemini. It's the exhale, I feel like, is Gemini. And then coming back through another inhale. So it could be definitely associated with, I love that. It's so beautiful envisioning, the inhalation as Sagittarius and building this fire and then sending it out, and this repetitive experience of breath.
Yeah. And Gemini, with regards to spirit and air, also reminds me of pollinators, right? How pollinators are really creatures of the wind, and the wind itself is a pollinator, right? How there's a spreading quality to Gemini that has more to do with connections or with inter and intra connections rather than a solid building of anything in particular.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like Gemini dances with the passion of Sagittarius. And that dance is what speaks to others and invites others to come back then again to the fire.
Yeah.
To this traveling fire. Yeah.
I love that. I'm curious to hear us maybe exploring a little bit about the planets that rule these signs as maybe another entry point into Gemini Sagittarius. As we know, Gemini is ruled by Mercury and Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, right? And you've kind of brought up Jupiter a couple times here, but what is your relationship with those planets?
I love that question, and I tend to experience them well right now as like an embodied experience. I mean, talking about a spirit and a deity, but I really experience them through my work with Odin,
Ooh.
as Mercury
Yeah.
and as Jupiter, as as the All Father in the Norse pantheon, and also as the wandering wizard, the trickster, one of the trickster gods, and that experience of that power of Jupiter, but that warmth and that immense capacity, and that really the rulership that Jupiter, has been considered of presiding over because of its size and because
Right.
of its powerful transits and its cycles. But thinking like, well, how that power can then be transmuted through a mercurial being that is able to take that power and go from place to place, zipping around, shape shifting. And that's really how I experience those two, at least right now, is this Jupiter is like, it is like the bonfire.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. And we all want to be around Jupiter, but it doesn't have the mobility that Mercury has.
Yeah.
And I would say too that, Mercury's capacity, and Mercury, like, I mean, Odin, Hermes, the different, I say Hecate, some people say Hecate, I'm not sure, but the different, triplicity kind of goddesses, that mercurial energy of shifting and changing and being able to dip into the underworld and then coming back and being able to go all the way out to get, the wisdom from Jupiter, the lessons from Saturn, and then coming back and bringing them, to Venus or bringing them to us. I mean, that is what I think legends, that it's so worthy of legend, because I think that that's really what our life ends up being. It's how we learn things.
Yeah.
We have to take it from a source and then bring it to a place where it can be understood. And so the nature of Mercury, I feel like, it's neutral. But I could also say that Jupiter's kind of neutral as well, because we know that Jupiter is called, a benefic, the great benefic. And, but not every Jupiter transit is, perfect.
Ooh, no, not at all. Wow, yes, that's so true. Oh gosh, I had a very life-changing and pretty traumatic Jupiter transit in my early 20s, actually. Yeah, I feel that.
Do you mind telling me about that?
Yeah,
I mean, as much as you feel comfortable. I don't want to
I'd
put you on the spot.
I'd love to. Yeah. It's interesting because that was when I came out as queer, and it was a moment of maybe, yeah, like a 6 month Jupiter return period of coming out to my parents, having my first lover break up with me, and then meeting my current partner, and then totally shifting my what I thought was going to be my lifelong profession, because I had studied classical music, and I thought after being done with school that I was going to be, I don't know, like maybe working at an orchestra somewhere, or even doing something arts adjacent. But no, I totally upended my life at that point, and it really changed the course of my life, and the decisions that I made then really, I think, reflected to what ended up happening with my life. Like, there's a course correction nature that I think Jupiter can sometimes bring into our lives that are not, that's not always pleasant, you know? And it can feel really destabilizing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
What is your Jupiter placement?
It's in
Forget.
Cancer in the 11th
Oh,
house.
oh. But what an interesting cycle. And I guess, I mean, so would you think that, I mean, so Jupiter like eventually gives you what you want, but it's kind of like Venus, and like Britton LaRue, you know,
Yeah.
her the way she speaks about Venus, I love, about how you have to get really clear about what you want,
Mm-hmm.
and then Venus will deliver. I mean, do you feel that Jupiter is like that?
You know, with Jupiter, it's been really interesting. My own experience with Jupiter is that I have, like I mentioned, Jupiter in Cancer in the 11th house, and it's in a, a not so close conjunction with Chiron. And so my experience with it, the 11th house of shared communities constellated around dreams and hopes, have not always been easy. But I have noticed that when I lean into it, when I consciously allow myself to be that Jupiter in Cancer person, good things do happen to me. But my experience with it is that there's more of a conscious engagement that I need to lean into. And something that comes up a lot for me is, you know, when I'm feeling a lot of scarcity mindset, like maybe around money, you know, or maybe around friendships and community. What I've been doing is I've really sat down with myself, and I've had this practice of transmuting that fear, you know, that nobody likes me or nobody wants to support my work, and then going out there and actively supporting other people, not with the intention to get something back in return, but rather to transmute this inner, I wouldn't even say blockage, but maybe inner Chiron Jupiter entanglement that I have.
Wow, that's a beautiful alchemical process.
Yeah.
I love that. I just want to share that I resonate with that in some ways, especially when I find myself, and this is like a mercurial thing, in a writer's block, which I have been in on and off for like 2 years now.
Yeah.
And when I just can't write. And like, I know I have to write this thing, and I love it. I love everything about it, but I can't make it happen. What I have found to be the most helpful is to really consume and absorb something different than what I'm writing. So I'll read a book. Like,
Yeah.
I need to read a freaking book. Like, if I can't write, like if it's not flowing out of me, like that's my sign that I need to consume somebody else's creativity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that that's a way that these archetypes can flow through us. So like that Jupiterian aspect of like, okay, like I'm not seeing the benefits that I need, so I'm going to be beneficial to others. And like, you know, Mercury, I don't have the creativity or the thoughts or the ideas that I need, so I'm going to consume, you know, what others have put out there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Exactly.
again, with this like the expansion and contraction, Gemini Sag.
I love that so much. I also want to bring in something that you mentioned earlier, which is about Odin. And it's so interesting that you mentioned how Odin is both this almost like father figure and also this traveling trickster. Because I recently was listening to a podcast episode about the mythic masculine and about how, you know, part of what's so challenging about, I mean, first of all, I don't even really know how I feel about the masculine feminine divide, but let's just say for for simplicity's sake, right? Let's just, you know, really treat this as an anthropological study and exploration. And in this podcast, the author was talking about his work researching various cultures, and especially cultures that revere the tricksters, or at least have a name for the trickster. And his argument was that part of what's been so difficult about being a quote unquote man, or to tap into the masculine energy for our age, is because we've kind of stripped away the trickster face of the masculine. The masculine also has a trickster nature to it that is ambiguous, that is defying categorization. And when we take away the humor, right, when we take away the absurdity, then the father just becomes this really stoic, hard shell that nobody can really live into. And then people snap, because they don't know how to fall. They don't know how to endure humiliation, right? They don't know how to work with this unpredictable energy that is inherent to life.
Wow. Yeah, it's almost like they don't know, they don't understand. It's like the system of patriarchy, and putting especially that, like the rigid male, the brawn male, the emotionless male
Yeah.
figure above all, um, has has really had that element. It's like there's not an obstacle to trickster around.
Right. Right.
Like, it's just, here you go, here's what you want,
Mm-hmm.
at least this part of you that society accepts.
Yeah.
And wow, that's really profound. And yeah, there's no fluidity allowed for that archetype.
Mm-hmm.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And am I also correct in remembering that Odin is the deity that was also hanging himself upside down? Is that true?
Yes. So this is, I mean, Odin is the deity that um, is referenced in the Hanged Man in so many different decks, the Rider-Waite Smith,
Right.
for sure, and so many others. And I would say also a very hermit character as well.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, Odin, in order to gain wisdom, stabbed himself with his own sword and hung upside down for 9 days from the tree of wisdom.
Mm.
And on the final day, this is so self-sacrifice, like no food, no drink. And on the final day was gifted the vision of the runes. He didn't create the runes, but
Yeah.
was gifted the vision, which he brought back to humanity. I mean, that's very profound, very bold trickster energy, and
Definitely.
also a very powerful, like, to believe in yourself enough that you can say, I can hang myself upside down from this tree of knowledge for 9 days without food or drink, and we'll just see what happens. Like, that is like such Jupiterian bravado, right?
I love that. Totally. Totally. Yeah, and it's yeah, something that was coming through for me as well about Jupiter is that I think there's something about the Jupiter archetype that is, I don't know, like, does have a bit of a trickster energy too. I think when I think about Jupiter, maybe like mythic character that came to my mind is Santa Claus. And how Santa Claus is just coming during Christmas and like, ha ha ha, here are your gifts, bitches, goodbye, right? See you next year.
Yeah, if you get one.
If you get one. Right, right. Yeah.
So I am not an expert on Odin. I just work with Odin, but and I have my own experience with Odin,
Yeah.
but I have definitely come across other people's research who and I'll give a shout out to the Otherworldly Oracle podcast,
Mm-hmm.
because they did an episode on Odin, and they brought up the fact that some people have found through research that there's a correlation between Odin and Santa Claus.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's this whole 12 days of, kind of like it's almost, it also aligns with the Saturnalia
Hmm.
festivities that like occasionally, like eventually that pagan experience that eventually became Christmas, like as
Yes.
we know it, and how it's all like, related to the magic of the solstice. And absolutely, like there's a trickster energy of just like, where does this person come from? And like, why do they have so much power? And why do they get to decide, who's good and who's bad? And like adding that into the trickstery element of how the tricksters love to play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, I know when Odin is helping me because there's a trick involved in the experience.
Yeah.
Like there's it's I get what I need, or I get what I'm after, but there's a funny ha moment for Odin about that I have to live through. Um, can I give you just a random example?
Of course.
Okay. So I was recently in Switzerland and France, and I did a retreat, and after that, I was fortunate to travel around with my mom, and
Mm-hmm.
my mom and I were in France, close to the Swiss border, and she got her passport, wallet, and phone stolen
Whoa.
2 days before her flight home. So
Oh
this is like
no.
all identity, all ID. I mean, it was not a violent robbery, right? It was pickpocketing.
Hmm.
But all identity is gone, right? Like all access to the outside world, is gone. Just like, what are we going to do? And gosh, okay, so one does not simply fly without a passport, so
No.
first things first, okay, and like there's all this rigmarole that we have to go through, and okay, it's filing a police report so that just in case the credit cards are used, we can prove that it was stolen. Then it's like getting from where we were to the nearest US embassy, which was 4 hours away,
Hmm.
um, through a series of taxi and train, in Bern, Switzerland. So I am like, okay, Odin, like, you're the one that can help me with this because this is really stressful. And there's a lot riding on not being able to take a flight because there's a lot of money that could be lost. And there's all kinds of things that we just don't want to have happen. And this is really frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention, it's very stressful to have, and disarming, destabilizing to experience a robbery of any sort.
Right.
And so I'm like, okay, like you gotta help me, please. And yeah, like I call, like we got right to the police office as soon as they opened the next day in France. They spoke enough English that we were able to file a report. And we were able to make all of the trains that we needed to make in order to get to the US embassy. That was, we had just enough time to make it that day. It was a Friday before they
Wow.
closed for the weekend, just enough
Mm-hmm.
time. And we're sitting there, and we're on the train in Switzerland, and okay, we're going to make it. We're going to make it. Okay. And there's no announcement of where we are. At least I didn't understand it. And I'm looking at my phone, and I'm looking at, where the GPS is. And I'm like, okay, like we've got another stop before Bern. And we didn't. And as soon as the train started to pull away, there was another person that was checking tickets that got on board and said, sprechen Sie Deutsch? I'm like, nine.
Hmm.
And she's like, do you know where you're going? I'm going to Bern. She's like, no, you're going to Zurich now, because we had just missed Bern. And I'm like, oh my God. And she's like, okay, we've got just, like you'll be able to make it, but you've got an hour to get to Zurich. There's no stop. And then you have to wait in Zurich and take the train to Bern. And it was like, okay, it was like the most trickstery thing because I just wasn't on top of my game. And that was such an Odin moment. But we got her passport. We got back to Bern. Everything happened like there wasn't a moment to spare, right?
Yeah.
There was not. It was like, okay, like we were going to get there. If we would have gotten off the train at our stop, we would have been there with a bit of time to spare.
Right.
And by the time that we had to do this whole 2-hour round trip to Zurich, of which we spent about 4 minutes in Zurich running from one train to the next, it was like, wow, like this happened just in the nick of time. But then we got there and it worked out perfectly. And everybody was so kind. And it was just one of those things where it's just like, yeah, like you're going to get what you want, but there's going to be a trick, and that's been my experience of working with Odin.
Damn. I love that. What a great story.
I cannot tell you how many MF bombs I dropped in the train when I found out that we had missed our stop, and how entertaining we must have been to everybody. Because we're just like, look, I'm from the US. I live in Mexico. We don't do trains. Like
we don't. No, not in the US.
I wish we did, but yeah, in Mexico either. But it was just such an Odin type of story, and it's so trickstery, but it's also so benefic. It's like, yeah, you're gonna get what you need.
Oh, I love that. What a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Megan.
Thank you.
I want to pivot us a little bit into, I don't know if you would want to connect this with Gemini and Sag. I feel like there's a deep connection here, but I really want to bring it into the modalities that you've been cultivating relationships with, specifically with, journey work, hypnosis, and also astrology. To me, there's so much Sagittarius in that, act of going into one's own personal underworld. And there's so much Gemini in the conversations, the meaning making, the connections, I like to think of the birth chart as like this treasure trove, right? Like when we're reading someone's natal chart, it's almost like, okay, pulling out all the, all the stops, all the different toys from the toolkit, And what has been your experience? What's your experience like learning these two modalities, practicing them, and working with people?
Well, I would say to start with hypnotherapy, I mean, Gemini in hypnotherapy is a voyage within, right? And it's our own personal connection, I believe, with spirit and with the collective consciousness. It's our own personal kind of like antenna into that to be able to gain higher perspective. So that is super Sagittarian. But the Gemini aspect is like going there and coming back. Like not just going there and staying there, which is like what Sagittarius would love to do. Like, I'm going to go to the top of this mountain and I'm never coming down. And Gemini is like, yeah, okay, we're going to go. And we're going to go multiple times. And like that Gemini aspect of like, yeah, we're going to go wherever you need to go. But we'll make it kind of quick. But then we're going to go multiple times. And that's important, I think, as well. It's, in Akashic records, where the more you do it, it's like training a muscle. So for me as a guide, as well as for my clients. So, I mean, most of my clients repeat clients, and we work together on a regular basis, and just seeing the ease and the mercurial nature that starts to come in and breathe, life from the world as we know it into their own personal deep wandering experience, like that is, it's so powerful, it's so beautiful. And I
Yes.
think that that is so much part of what I try to teach as well. And my experience with the underworld is like, okay, like, yeah, we can go there as a Sagittarius, and we're coming, but we're going to put on our winged booties and come back in our mercurial nature,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's so important about, because we are living in human bodies on the planet Earth,
Mm-hmm.
and in whatever city or place that we're living. And we do have to come back, because there are people that depend on us. There are bills to be paid. There's food that we have to eat. Like, we have this whole human experience. So it's, when I do hypnotherapy, it's very much like, you know, we're gonna go to the unknown, and maybe it'll be like vaguely reminiscent. The more you do it, it does seem more familiar, but then we're coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I experience hypnotherapy to be such a unique modality because often, as you know, doing mystical work, we do readings, and we as the practitioner is more a channel, for information that wants to come through for this person. I like to think of the role of the reader both as, you know, a mirror, but also um, kind of like an instrument, right? That inspires a song to come out of the person that we're reading for. But to me, hypnotherapy is so unique in that um, it's really my own experience. Like your role was to almost guide me and help me not be lost in that realm, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at my own material.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Yeah.
in sessions, I don't know if maybe perhaps your session has changed or transformed since the last time we had a session, but you are it's like in that trance state, you would be repeating back to me some of the words and some of the findings um that I saw in that realm, and having that kind of narrated back to you is so affirming because so many of us, I think, have a connection inherently to that world, but we don't trust it, you know?
Mm.
Mm.
No, I love that. Yeah, I do think that that is very, I mean, anytime I talk about Gemini Sag in my work and my personal experience, I'm talking about the sixth and the 12th house. And so that is absolutely like, I, it's a great honor for me to be there and to witness and reflect in the 12th house realm of hypnosis,
Yeah.
which is where everything can be healed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm convinced.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or at least we can get insights. At the very least, we can get profound insights
Yeah.
that can help us find another healing modality. I don't think this is not the way to do it, right? This
Right.
is one of many ways, but it's super helpful. And it's so empowering, right? To have yourself be the one to receive this information,
Mm-hmm.
and to experience visions. And a lot of times what I find with first time, with people that I'm accompanying for the first time, is that they really kind of doubt their own capacity to experience a vision or
Mm.
trust a vision or a feeling.
Yeah.
And that's so like 12th housey. So it's like, yes, of course, like I'm going to reaffirm to you this, what you just said, because that is what you are experiencing right now. And it's totally valid. And you will have all the time in the world to
Yeah.
analyze it at a later date.
Right.
But right now, I'm just going to affirm it to you. And I'm here, and we do recordings if people want it recorded, and then we'll come back. And like, this is something that once you are able to trust your own subconscious, your own 12th house, right? um you there's a tremendous amount, again, of empowerment
Mm.
that is there, because it's, whenever we fear something, we fear to tread in our own experience, something that is ours. We fear to even go there.
Yeah.
that makes us up, that is part of us.
Mm.
Like that, when we fear that, then we give so much power away to other people, and they
Yeah.
don't have any right to that power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we often give that power away as a desperation to be seen in one way or another, even if it's not favorable.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's like, no, let my goal is for people to see themselves at the spirit level,
Mm.
to see themselves at their inner child, which is a lot of the work I've been doing lately, a lot, and to see themselves as their shadow.
Wow.
And that is so exciting because, oh, when you can see yourself as your shadow and you can have compassion and meet your shadow and withhold and witness and be there to hold space for the anger that maybe it has, the resentment, the guilt, all of that, that gut level feeling that we walk around with. And you can make friends with your shadow who's holding all of that for you so graciously.
Yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, now we're in a collaboration. And when you can collaborate with your shadow, you are an unstoppable force for whatever you wish. And this is not an aspirational thing, like
Yeah.
this is whatever you choose to do,
Mm-hmm.
however you choose to live your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ah, such a gift. Thank you, Megan. That was beautiful. Um, what do you find people come to you with? In general, do you notice patterns with regards to some of the concerns that people come to you with, or what they not on a personal level, but really in terms of the kinds of people who you hold space for? What are some of the general themes that you notice?
I mean, if I could say it, it all boils down to, in my experience, and I'm generalizing a bit, but not a lot. It all boils down to wanting to feel safe in who we are and that who we are is enough.
Mm,
And this is inner child healing. This is shadow. This is um, more specific work, like when people want to work on an addiction.
yeah.
They want to achieve a goal with their physical experience. So maybe they want to become more physically active or something like that. The block is almost always a part of us that has found ourselves really wounded at our core. And this is almost always, I mean, it always is in childhood, usually by the age of 4. Um, we've been wounded in our core that something told us that we were unlovable.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, so then there's different things that spring from that. There's abandonment, then there's safety, and there's anger, and there's fear. All of those things then come from that space. But like when we are born in our spirit, who we are as spirits is we are love.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
how we express all of that through our human form and in our very complex world and societies and communities, that I do believe gets, I want to say twisted, but I don't want to make it sound bad, but it can get distorted. And
Right.
so this is the distortion is what we're trying to bring clarity to in the space of the subconscious mind.
I love that. Thank you, Megan. So profound. Um, I can speak to you forever, but and this conversation has just been so wonderful. But I want to gently wind us to a close. And so I'm curious if there's anything else you wish to explore or that you wish to share before we adjourn.
I guess the one thing that I don't know that I really made the connection between working with hypnosis and astrology.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on it. I've been adding. I used to think of them as totally separate things,
Mm-hmm.
and now I just feel that the looking at the natal chart and the transits, but often the natal chart with first-time clients, and then transits with return clients, especially people that I work with in a container that I call integration. The whole process of it is to have several sessions in which then we have hypnosis, and then we also have a space where we can talk about and integrate what the person is experiencing. Because I think that's so important, not to just have these wild, almost psychedelic voyages and then, okay, that was cool, but which is really profound. And it's fine if people want to do that. But I have found that it's really great to come back and then, Gemini it out and talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But, bringing astrology into the mix and is a really beautiful way to help both of us get to see what might be present for the client at that time,
right,
and where some of that shadow might be lurking, shall we say. And I find this a lot with anger. And I find this a lot with, people who have specifically been socialized for many different reasons and are many different identities, who've been socialized not to express anger, but yet anger still exists. And this is a really deep conversation that we could have at another time, but it's one of the things that I find myself also working with people on a lot, is to even identify, oh, wait a minute, I am angry about this, and finding, there's hints, right? There's clues in the natal chart, especially with Black Moon Lilith is one of my favorites to work with. Mars and a few of the different asteroids, where this anger is, and like, can we just give it a space to be heard? Because it's so subconscious, because it's been pushed so far down, because nobody wanted to make space for our anger.
Yeah. It's scary.
And it is scary. It is scary. And for so many reasons, people didn't want to make space. Our caregivers didn't have time, or they didn't know how. In school, there's no time to be angry. Like, go take a time out and get rid of your anger, that kind of thing. Like, it's just going to go away. We end up really suppressing it, and it ends up coming out in ways that we really don't. It's not beneficial for us or anybody else.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm primarily using astrology now, is to kind of like, okay, let's, like, just as a curiosity. I'm not saying that every, client's Black Moon Live is like the key to their subconscious mind and their anger, but it does have something going on there. So yeah. I love being able to incorporate the two together in either a longer reading or a session where we start with that and then go into a hypnosis session based on what we find, or in a larger container where we talk about that, and then at another time we go into a hypnosis and a trance.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I feel like your work is so interesting and so valuable. And yeah, if anyone is curious to work deeper with you, where can people find you?
So if you want to find my Gemini self, you can go to healingwavehypnosis.com or Instagram. I also have a YouTube, which you can connect to through my website, healingwavehypnosis.com, or IG at healingwavehypnosis. And if you want to connect with my Sagittarian self, That is Megan_L_Frye on IG or meganfrye.com.
Awesome. Well, my last question for you, Megan, is if I offer up the phrase healing the spirit to you, what comes up for you? What do you perceive to be the opportunities and what do you perceive to be the challenges in that concept?
I love that, and it's so 12th house for me. I just feel that being very 12th house, and I feel that as being like, let's incorporate everything that we've learned through this wheel of a hero's journey that we've completed, and now we're in the 12th house, and let's hold it and love it and make it part of us, really make it real, really integrate it before we emerge as the big bang back into the first house.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's just, when you say healing the spirit, I'm drawn to this image of these underwater caves in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, where these are related to the cenote network. It's like an underwater rivers that lead to these pools that are not only a source of fresh water, but they are deeply sacred in the Mayan cosmology. And in some of these underwater tunnels, there's so many miles of them. And there's water that comes in from the sea, and that fills up half of the tunnel, and it's at the bottom. And the fresh water rises to the top because it's less dense. And for me, like, that is the 12th house, and that is like the layers of spirit that we have that we're able to navigate when we're able to really go to an unknown place, which is where spirit resides. I mean, by definition, it's the realm. And so I feel like just going there and then choosing, do I want to swim in the fresh water, or do I want to swim back out to sea in the salt water?
Wow. I love that.
That's how I see it. I love it. I love healing the spirit. I love it. That's beautiful. I remember when you mentioned it, and I think you said that you had another name when you had first named it. And now it has just it's become its own thing. And I'm so excited for you and so grateful for this space.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for gracing us with your presence and your wisdom and for this extremely beautiful, very Gemini Sag conversation.
Thank you so much. It's really a delight for me. And thank you for everybody who's listening. Really appreciate it.
All right, that's it for my conversation with Megan. I hope that through this conversation, this transmission, you are receiving some information, some insights, some exciting new discoveries that maybe pop up within your own field of what it means to be living this experience of the Gemini-Sagittarius axis. And if you resonate with Megan's voice, I highly recommend that you check out Megan's offerings, her website. All of the links will be down below. And yeah, if you enjoy this podcast, I would love it if you could leave a review. Reviews are super, super helpful in helping other people find this work, these conversations. I would also welcome you to check out the weekly contemplations that I share about the astrology and the energy of the week. really showing up in my podcast has been one of my favorite ways of showing up. So if you've been supporting, if you've been listening, if you've been sharing a review, thank you, thank you, thank you. If you have not, then feel free to leave a review and a 5-star rating. Literally 2-3 sentences are definitely enough. And if you want to go more, I will not stop you. I would love to receive any feedback you may have for these conversations. And if you feel like this conversation that I had with Megan will be beneficial for someone, feel free to share it. And yeah, I am excited to see you again next time, whenever that may be, that I release the next episode or that you tune in to another episode. And yeah, I hope that you take good care of yourself, and I'm sending you so much love. Thank you so much.